Good afternoon, everybody. Live from the Talk Radio studio. This is Talk TV. And I had a ponderous pause for a second as I deal with the next story, because I have to say I am, to say the very least, wound up about it. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is going to be extradited to the US. It's because it's been approved by our Home Secretary, Priti Patel, who, well, the empire strikes back. Mr. Assange, let's call him that, has 14 days to appeal over the decision, and Assange is wanted, just to remind you, by the American authorities over documents leaked in 2010 and 2011, which the US says broke the law and endangered lives. It's part of the WikiLeaks leak. Now, here to tell us more on the legal side of the extradition is founder and managing partner of GS2 Law in New York, Rob Garson, who is a British qualified barrister who worked in crime and extradition in this country, but also runs his own big firm that's located in New York and Miami. Rob Garson, you know, I have to say, this is a complex situation on the face of it, but I have to say it's also a simple one, and you don't mind for a second me just setting out the picture so our listeners and our viewers understand. I don't like Julian Assange. I think what he did was extremely dangerous. I also don't necessarily believe that he is covered by what you might describe as journalistic immunity, i.e. where you do something, release names, for example, in the interest of a bigger freedom, because I think he put lives at risk. That's why it's not people from the right, but people like Barack Obama, for instance, who was president at the time, who insisted on extraditing him and insisted on ensuring that he was held to account. But what I am worried about is the extradition treaty with America, because ultimately what I'm not sure of is what offence he's alleged to have committed in America, why it's not protected by a law which governs and ensures that people have the right to freedom of speech, the First Amendment of the Constitution, and thirdly, how it is that America is able to extradite him in these circumstances, but we've been unable to extradite Anne Secoulas, who killed a young man and has yet to stand trial in this country. It seems as ever, and there was a brilliant article which I asked you to read and I ask all of our listeners and viewers to read, by a man who I very often don't agree with, Peter Hitchens, to say this is yet another example of us playing poodle to America's great big Doberman Pinscher, isn't it?
Well, thank you very much for sending that along to me this morning. And it did provide very interesting reading. And as you said, this is a remarkably complex political and legal situation which has arisen. Hitchin is very interesting because after you asked me to read that and I looked at it, I then looked at some of his prior tweets going way back when. And he, in fact, called out Julian Assange previously and said, look, if you want to be out there, if you want to do what you did, like if I would have called out the British for their actions in 1976, go over there, face the music, and you know, have the courage of your convictions and air this publicly. Now Hitchens is turning around and saying, well, actually, I don't like what is this territorial overreach, so to speak, by somebody who's not an American citizen, committing acts not on American territory. Right. So the question is legally, how did the grand jury indict him, and what did they indict Julian Assange
So
for?
You, as ever, have curated and asked yourself precisely the right question. Help us understand, right, what is he being dragged back to America for? What is the nature of the criminal charges against him?
So it's 17 charges of espionage and 1 charge of computer fraud and abuse. That is... And the way they've done it is quite clever in the way that they've indicted, and the grand jury indicted Julian Assange, was by way of a conspiracy with Chelsea, formerly Bradley Manning, right, who was sentenced, as we know, to 35 years in prison, which was later then commuted by Barack Obama. Then Chelsea Manning was put back in prison for contempt for refusing to assist the authorities in testifying as against Julian Assange. So Barack Obama flip-flopped in relation to his approach there with with Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, seeking at the end of his presidency to commute Chelsea Manning's sentence out of the 35 years.
What did they do that was so egregious? Let's just come back so people understand. You know, why have, regardless of the political complexion in America, so you've got, you know, it's going to be a long time, I suspect, till we'll see a president as liberal as Barack Obama, through Trump even, through now to Joe Biden. Why, if the one thing that the American political elite have in common is a desire to see Julian Assange put behind bars, what is the national security threat that's so vast that that's the thing where, if nothing else, they can sit around the table and nod at each other about?
So there are two questions that arise there. There's the political aspect and there's the legal aspect here. But obviously there's cross-pollination between the two. You have to remember that Chelsea Manning was sitting there as a U.S. service person.
Right.
In the I think that Chelsea Manning was abroad on base that had the highest level of clearance. Julian Assange, according to the indictments, conspired together with Chelsea Manning to hack, download 4 databases of information with 90,000 documents relating to Afghanistan, many of them either sensitive or highly classified, and I believe 40,000 documents, or no, it may have been even, 40,000 documents relating to Iraq. Ongoing operations at the time revealing names of service personnel, movements of soldiers. There were also undercover people, right. The names and identities of informants. This was a massive trove of information.
Right, Rob Garson, I get the idea that he put people's lives at operational risk. I mean, as you know, there's a reason why we have the 30-year rule, and even longer for some instances of clandestine action in this country and in America. It's to protect the way that we do things. Espionage and our methods are very important that we keep them secret, right? I get that. But, you know, the most important thing some people will argue he did, him and Edward Snowden, all interconnected with one another, was to reveal that the American state was breaking the law, not least, for example, spying on its own citizens, for instance. And that's an act, surely, which ought to be covered by the First Amendment in America and by principles of freedom of speech here.
Well, first and foremost, he isn't entitled to the First Amendment. He's not an American citizen. He never was an American citizen. Secondly, that's why they have indicted him in the way that they've done so. They're not talking about First Amendment issues. They're talking about going in, cracking into sensitive and classified information, using a person who is in the military to misuse their passwords and to download that information. You could have an incredibly open door of slippery slopedness, if you could say that. Right. If you had to say, well, there's no point in having anything which is classified and sensitive as long as we have some form of generalized whistleblower protection.
Right. So that's a really important point that you make here, is that ultimately when you nick state secrets, you do an act of de facto treason, which places the nation in danger. And the slippery slope argument is even where government is breaking the law, or the clandestine services are doing that, whoever they are, there needs to be a way of reporting that doesn't not just blow the whistle, but blow the whole operation apart and cause enduring operational, violence and risk to the people who are involved when they're trying to keep our democracy safe. That's a good way of putting it, slippery slopery, I have to say. Just help us out, 2 more questions. One's about Anne Secoulis, and the other one, which is a quickie, is what sort of sentence is he facing?
So it's interesting. He's got a maximum sentence potentially of 175 years. And in America, they do that. We do that, I suppose. We put people in prison for many, many lifetimes. However, we can look at Chelsea Manning's sentence and say there was a 35-year sentence, first and foremost. Secondly, the American government have made 2 major concessions at the moment. Number one, they won't put Julian Assange into the supermax federal prison out in Florence, Colorado, and instead will have him located within Alexandria, within one of the prisons in Alexandria, Virginia, which has a very good reputation. Secondly, they will allow him to serve his sentence out in Australia. which is...
Can I just pause you there? I suspect part of the reason for that is because they knew that there was going to be challenges for representatives on behalf of Assange saying that that sort of supermax prison wouldn't satisfy the human rights requirements of allowing somebody to be extradited in this country. Now, I've only got a minute left and there's so much to get through. Anne Sakoulas, as you know, is a big political hot potato for people who are interested in politics, but to the family of the young man that she ran over, it's not political, it's personal. Why have the UK government been unable to extradite her, and doesn't that speak volumes about the nature of this treaty?
It does speak volumes about the nature of this treaty. There are many reasons as to why politically, I suppose, it would make it very difficult for the United States to hand over somebody who was working under their aegises at the time, because that, again, would open a very wide door. This is about a power play. You also have got to remember here that Jake Sullivan, somebody that you and I knew or debated against at university, is the National Security Advisor.
Well,
Julian Assange leaked some of his personal past.
Well, no doubt you'll be speaking to him, and I urge people to listen to you and go to GS2 Law. That was Rob Garson. This is Rob Rinder, live from the Talk Radio studio, and this is Talk TV.